Hi, I'm Caitlin, and this is Book Chats, and you're watching the 2016 Oscars tag. The wonderful Rebecca from WhyMermaids and I wrote this tag based on the 2016 Oscar nominations for Best Picture. We did one last year for the 2015 ceremony as well. Without further ado, I'm going to go through each of the movies and the questions that we chose for each movie, and then we have a bonus question at the end, and then I'm going to tag a whole ton of you. There's also a version of this video over on Rebecca's channel, so please go check that out as well. I'll link to it at the end and in the show notes below, in the doobly-doo. Here are our questions. Also, these movies are in alphabetical order, just FYI. The first movie I'm going to talk about is The Big Short. If you don't know, The Big Short is a movie about the financial crisis and some of the things that led up to it, and it's based on a book by Michael Lewis. We want you to choose a book that you thought would be boring, but actually turned out to be really interesting. I am going to exclude all of Michael Lewis's books because he wrote the book that inspired this movie, but I do think that he does a really great job of explaining things that you didn't think would be interesting in a way that ends up being very interesting. But for this question, the book that I chose was one that I actually had to read for class. It was a textbook, and that was King Solomon's Ring by Conrad Lorenz. So this is a book about animal ethology written by a famous animal ethologist. So animal ethology is the behavior of animals, and it's basically like observing animals and taking notes on them and then trying to figure out why they behave the way they do. I really enjoyed this book. I really had enjoyed James Herriot's books as a kid, which are a little more about people than they are about the animals he takes care of, and I felt like this book kind of fit in that kind of genre of like animal books that are interesting and that like are memoirs and are more surprising than I realized. The next movie that I'm going to talk about is Bridge of Spies, which if you have seen it, you'll know that Tom Hanks's character has to defend a spy against kind of the popular opinion of the public. For this movie, we want you to identify a book that you often find yourself defending against popular negative opinion of it. So the book that I chose was Mockingjay by Suzanne Collins. There are a lot of criticisms about this book that people have, and some of them I think are fairly valid, but I think to sum up my feelings, my positive feelings about this book and how I find myself defending it against people very often, I think it would help for me to just say that I love the epilogue, I think the epilogue is great, and I will defend the epilogue against any of you. The next movie that I'm going to talk about is Brooklyn, which I actually have seen and thought was wonderful and is, again, based on a book. This movie is about a girl who emigrates from Ireland to the United States. She lives again in Brooklyn, and kind of the struggle that she has between her life, her past life in Ireland and her current life in America, and just some decisions he has to make around those two lives. So we want you to identify a character who is struggling and is torn between two cultures or two kind of lives. The character that I chose was Marjane Satrapi's self-character in Persepolis. Persepolis is a memoir, a graphic memoir by Marjane Satrapi, I'm sorry if I'm saying her name incorrectly, draws her childhood in Iran as it was going through a lot of political changes, and then in boarding school in France, and then back in Iran as an adult, and eventually being kicked out of the country. So I thought that this person and this character really fit for this question, and she ends up being actually kicked out of her country because of some of the views that she holds and the things that she does, but she still identifies as a Persian. The next movie is Mad Max Fury Road, and if you've seen it, you know that it has almost no dialogue. It's pretty much straight action, no talking. And so we want you to identify a character whose actions speak louder than his or her words. And the character that I chose, Wallace Wallace from No More Dead Dogs by Gordon Corman. So the kind of premise of this book is that Wallace Wallace refuses to lie. He will not lie, and he gets in a situation where basically he disagrees with his teacher about this book, and his teacher puts him in detention until he rewrites this essay about this book, and he refuses to rewrite the essay because he doesn't feel like anything else or anything that he would rewrite would be anything but a lie, and he refuses to lie. So it's interesting to see kind of this bashing of wills and his refusal to lie and the way that it affects his behavior and all the people around him who are trying to affect his behavior. And he's like, no, I don't want to lie, and that would be a lie, and so I'm not going to do that. The next movie is The Martian, which was also based on a book, guys. What? Many of you have probably read it. We want you to identify a book that takes place on a planet that is not Earth. And I have not chosen The Martian for this question, even though it is a great book and I really enjoyed it and would recommend it. I am going to say really quickly that the books that I chose for this it's a little bit of a spoiler to know that they don't happen on Earth / not that they don't happen on Earth, but they happen on a planet. Like, I guess what I'm going to say is when you read the first book, it reads very much like a fantasy novel, and you think it's like high fantasy and like Sutherland. And when you read the second book, you find out that it's actually sci-fi. It's not fantasy because there is a spaceship. The series is the Samaria series by Sharon Shin. I'm specifically a big fan of the first book, Archangel, which actually reads like a straight fantasy, like a straight high fantasy. But if you continue and read Yova's Angel, which is the second, you will find out that it is sci-fi. And it happens on a planet. And that planet is, to my knowledge, not Earth. They're just really enjoyable and have some romance going on and possibly are more problematic than I realized when I first read them. But no matter. The next movie we're going to talk about is The Revenant, which was directed by Alejandro González Iñárritu, who is a Mexican director. For this movie and this question, we want you to identify a great book written by someone whose first language was not English. So this can either be a book that was translated from another language into English, or it can be a book that was written originally in English, but the author English was not their first language. The book that I chose was the latter of those. It is Listen Slowly by Tanha Lai, whose name I might have mispronounced because I didn't listen to it immediately before saying it. This book I listened to on audio last year, and I highly recommend it on audio, and I also highly recommend it. It's about a Vietnamese American girl who is forced to go back to Vietnam with her grandmother over the summer when she just wants to be an all-American girl. And it's kind of about the ways that she struggles with the fact that her culture, like her parents passed on some but not all of their culture, and kind of the barriers to her knowledge about that, and the ways that she also has chosen not to learn about it, and like now learning about it, and just it's complicated, but it's very interesting and is really well done, and I really appreciated it. Next movie I'm going to talk about is Room, which happens to also be based on a book. And so the question that we've chosen to go with this movie is choose a book that happens in a very close or small setting. And I chose The Westing Game by Alan Raskin, which pretty much happens entirely within one apartment complex. This is a book that I think I've mentioned before and that you might have heard about already because I'm pretty sure it won a Newbery. It is an amazing puzzle book that I love so much for the ways that it just kind of is fit together so perfectly, is a wonderful puzzle and a mystery, and that, especially when I first read it, even though I technically had been like spoilered by a bad movie adaptation, I still enjoyed the challenge and felt like it was so like great to try to figure out what was happening. The final movie that I'm going to talk about is Spotlight, which is a movie about the Boston Globe's investigation of the Catholic Church's cover-up of priests abusing minors. This question we've chosen to go with it is to choose a book that talks about a difficult subject. So my gut reaction was just to say Missoula because, as you know, I've been pushing that on everyone and I've already talked about it a ton on my channel. So I told myself I was not allowed to pick it for this question. Instead, I chose Chasing Silhouettes, which is by Emily Wierenga. I'm not sure if I said her name correctly. Anyway, this book, first I'm going to say that this is a Christian book and it comes from a faith-based perspective. I felt like this book was really helpful and meaningful to me. It is a book that is written for people who have a loved one who is struggling with an eating disorder, and it's written to try to help you like figure out how to help and deal with and support that loved one. The author herself had anorexia, and so she comes specifically from that viewpoint, and she tries to address other types of eating disorders as well, but she also admits that like she only has personal experience with one specific type of eating disorder. Like, we don't talk about eating disorders very much, and I could have friends who need to read this book and I would never know because they are not going to talk about how they have a loved one who has an eating disorder, and so that is the book that I want to highlight here. Our final bonus question is a hashtag OscarSoWhite question, and that is for you to choose a book that you would like to see adapted with a person of color as a main character. Now this can go one of two ways. You can either choose a book that already has a person of color as a main character that you would love to see adapted to film, or you can choose a book that you would love to see made into a film that either has white main characters or has ambiguously described main characters, and you would love to see that material race bent and a person of color as a main character instead of white person. So I have like kind of two different options, an adult and a young adult for this. I realized thinking about this question that I just want to see more kind of like fun, happy romances with people of color as main characters. I feel like there are not a lot of those. So the books that I chose for adults, I chose the book Stay by Allie Larkin, which is this great kind of romance that the main character deals with a lot of kind of emotional things, and there's a dog involved, and it's wonderful, and I would love to see either the main character or the main love interest, or both of them cast as people of color in a theoretical movie adaptation. The young adult option that I chose is any of the 3 books in Jeanette Rallison's My Fair Godmother series. So this is a series of kind of like standalone but vaguely related books in which girls are in situations, I think it's always a girl, but the 3rd book I haven't actually read yet, so maybe it's guy anyway. They get assigned a fairy godmother, except that their fairy godmother basically failed her godmother tests, and this is like her remedial lesson, and she's supposed to be doing good, but she's not. So it ends up being this comedic and hilarious look where she's like trying to do the right thing, but she ends up doing the wrong thing and sending these girls into these fairy tales, and they have to like try to figure out their way out. And I just really enjoy these books. They are the humor that I particularly get and love, and I would love to see any of them made into a movie with a person of color as the main character. Specifically, I would love to see it as the main kind of girl character, but I would be open to them as the love interest as well. And I think this is because when I look at kind of fairy tales in the movies already, they're so white. Like the way that we adapt and perceive fairy tales are very white. And a large part of this probably has to do with kind of the Western European source material that Disney is pulling from and other kind of fairy tale people are pulling from. But I think also it has to do with the fact that Hollywood is just so white. And so I would love to see like, hey, fairy tales can be for non-Caucasians too. I think that these books are particularly funny and hilarious and wonderful, and the main characters have to be spunky and they have to have motivation and ability to get out of these situations, and I would just love to see that. So that is the 2016 Oscars tag, and please go check out Rebecca's video where she does this tag, and I'm sure she has more interesting picks in a better video that is shorter than this one. I also would love to see other people do this, so I'm gonna tag a whole bunch of people, but I would love you guys to do this tag if you would like to, because I realized while answering the questions that I love the questions, but that I'm not sure that my answers are adequate, and I would love to see other people's answers and maybe pick up some other books because of it. And so here are the people I'm gonna tag, but if you are interested in this tag, please do it. I would love to see it just go all over BookTube. So I would like to specifically tag Michelle from Michelle is Life, Kayla from Kayla Rain, Jenna from Jenna Claire K, Natasha from Tashopolis, Stephanie from Shy Notebooks, Mari from My Name is Madinez, Kim from Kimberly's Mindstorm, and Sana from Inkbones Books. Please take the time to do this 2016 Oscars tag and let us know the answers to these questions. There are 8 questions and 1 bonus question. I will put all the questions below, and I will see you guys next time. Please go watch Rebecca's version of this tag. I will put a link below and up above. And I'll see you later. Bye.